This talk is all about, just sort this out for myself, decade plus of maintaining ZAP. That's the Z Proxy. And so my name's Simon Bennetts, and I am now working full-time on ZAP thanks to the software security project. So in this talk, I'm going to give an introduction to ZAP for anyone who doesn't know it very well. Then I'm going to talk about why I created ZAP and talk about how some things I've learned and some things that kind of useful to know about running an open source project that has, I think it's fair to say, become fairly successful, and some of the ongoing challenges, and then a conclusion as well. So first of all, introduction to ZAP kind of helps to know what we're talking about. So what is ZAP? So ZAP is a tool for finding vulnerabilities in web applications. And it's a particular type of tool as well, because it's not a vulnerability scanner that detects known vulnerabilities in known applications. So it doesn't check that you've got WordPress and then go through all the versions, it finds which plugins you've got installed, which versions, and then go, okay, we know you've got this particular version of this plugin, therefore you're vulnerable to this known vulnerability, this known CVE. So we don't typically just check for CVEs. We do check in some cases. But really what we're doing is we're looking for new vulnerabilities in new applications. This is good because, a lot of people use ZAP on applications that no one's ever seen before, or no security person's ever seen before. And those applications won't have known vulnerabilities because no one's checked. So what ZAP does, it acts like a malicious attacker and tries to find vulnerabilities in the application in the same way that a malicious attacker or a human pen tester will do. It is completely free and open source, and it's a very welcoming community-based project. So if you'd like to get involved, and I'll explain how you can do that later, please get in touch. We're always looking for more people to get involved. And it is ideal for both newcomers and experts alike. We know that there are a lot of people who use ZAP who are completely new to web security, whether they are students or developers. We know people who have helped learn, teach themselves about security using ZAP, and it goes all the way up to hardcore pen testers who use ZAP as well. But ZAP is great for automation. That was one of the key things that I wanted to achieve early on. And it's got a lot of very powerful automation features. And we believe it is the world's most frequently used web application scanner. Now, it's difficult to prove, but we've been saying that for many years, and none of our competitors have challenged it. So that is, and this is both open source and commercial tools as well. So nobody else seems to make so many statistics public, but we do. So have a look at zaproxy.org/statistics, and you'll see we update the stats every month. I think last month, ZAP was run around 4 million times in 1 month. So you can see all the latest stats, and if any commercial tools or open source tools think they do any better than that, then let us know. We'd love to hear about it. So why did I create ZAP? So in 2009, I was a developer and team leader, and I was creating an online service for a FTSE 100 company. So that's one of the biggest 100 companies in the UK. And we knew it was security critical. And so we planned security in from the start. We thought about in the design, the implementation. But I hadn't actually had any security training, and neither the other developer on the project, which was not unusual. At that stage, there wasn't that much security training. But even we thought about security, but I wanted to make sure that we'd got everything right. So we planned a pen test 2 weeks before going live. Now, if anyone works in security, they'll know that's a bit of a red flag. But at the time, it seemed like a good idea. And we got the pen testers in, a couple of pen testers, and sat them in a room, and I explained all about the application that we were working on. And I wanted to make sure they understood it completely so they could test it as effectively as possible and find anything before we went live. And told them everything about it, left them alone to get on with it, and then came back in 1 hour just to see if there's anything they didn't understand. Could I help with anything? And I was somewhat shocked to find one of them logged in as myself. We had given them test credentials, but they were just minimal user credentials, and my account was the super user. So they had actually logged in as super user, which they shouldn't have been able to do. It was actually worse than that. So it wasn't actually a vulnerability in the application that we'd written. In this case, they had cracked the single sign-on solution for that FTSE 100 company in 1 hour. That was very shocking and a bit of an eye-opener. At the end of the test, we got the results back, and I mean, they explained some of the results as we went along. The single sign-on vulnerability technically was out of scope, but we were really pleased. They told us about it, so we kind of got a free pen test on the single sign-on solution. But they found one cross-site scripting vulnerability that slipped through, and there were other vulnerabilities like CSRF that I'd never even heard of. And with CSRF, cross-site request forgery, I explained that once a pen tester explained what that meant to me, I said, well, it's okay because this is an admin console. It's behind a firewall. And the pen tester then went ahead and explained to me how that didn't matter and how someone could attack it even outside the firewall. So that was a complete eye-opener. As a matter of interest, the pen tester who was actually logged in as me, this guy called Yanis, and he's now part of the extended ZAP team, has just started working on security again, and we're working on videos together. So if you have a look at the latest ZAP videos, you'll see Yanis, and that's how we met. But the pen test, in the end, really, as far as I was concerned, was a complete car crash. It was exactly what I didn't want to happen. So I kind of had to pick myself up and decide, right, what I'm going to do. And what I wanted to do was, one, I wanted to find a tool that we could use to automate security tests so I won't get embarrassed by the pen testers again. I wanted to learn more about web security because clearly I didn't know enough about it. And I wanted to join a friendly open source project, web security project. And I thought, well, that could cover all of these three things. It'd allow me to run some tests, learn more about security, and maybe contribute to it. So I went about trying to find a suitable project. And I was kind of surprised because there were, at that time, 2009, no actively maintained open source web security projects. This just felt wrong. I really thought that there should be something out there. I did find some abandoned ones. There was Web Scarab from OWASP, which I didn't really get on with. There's another one called Paros Proxy, which I quite liked. Had a few annoying things, but it was also written in Java, which I did like, particularly as I was a Java developer. So I pulled that into Eclipse and started playing around with it. But I also started learning things like the OWASP Top 10. I hadn't heard of OWASP before, to my shame, but I started learning about the OWASP Top 10. And then I started, what I wanted to do is try and make sure I actually knew something, was really learning. And how do you know if you've learned something? Well, one way is to try and teach someone else. So I knew the other developers and QA people where I worked didn't know enough about security either. So I started giving top 10 presentations, all basic stuff, but just it helped me kind of get my head together and make sure I understood it. But the first question everyone asked was, what tool should we use? So I decided to go back and have another look and see what tools I could actually recommend. And what I was looking for was something that was free and open source, cross-platform, easy to use and maintained. And I had a really good look and I couldn't find anything. The closest thing was Paros Proxy, except that wasn't being maintained. Well, kind of it wasn't, but I'd already started tweaking it. I'd started playing around with it. I started making a few changes, trying to see how it worked and improving it. So that meant that this version of Paros was being maintained. So I took a deep breath and forked it and rebranded it and released it as ZAP, which was quite nerve-wracking at the time. I wasn't sure whether I was, security people were going to laugh at me or whether I was going to be sued by anyone. But I had some help pages and made a load of miscellaneous improvements. So I changed how the breakpoints worked, added notes, history filter, and alert dialog, reports menu, a few things that were actually quite useful. And I created the ZAP developer Google group. But before I announced it, it was very nearly derailed. Paros had been abandoned for many years. And then it was like June or July or something, before I launched Zap, somebody else, a guy called Axel Newman, a security researcher, released Andy Paros, which was a fork of Paros. And that was, really did, I wasn't happy about that. I was thinking, well, here am I, a developer who doesn't know anything about security, and I'm just trying to get started. And someone who's experienced in security is actually really, forked Paros just before me. They're going to do a better job. There's no point. I might as well give up right now. But I had a look at it, and I looked at the changes he had made, and he was still focusing very much on pen testing, and I was trying to create a tool which was more useful for developers. So I decided to go ahead, and he actually noticed the developer group and got in touch, and we agreed to collaborate. He still wanted to carry on with Andy Paros. I wanted to carry on with Zap, but we did. But we started talking and working out how we could work together. And he actually became one of the first project leaders to join Zap. I just gave him admin rights in the end. So I think it was October 2010, I announced Zap on BugTrack. So BugTrack was probably one of the biggest security mailing lists at that time. And this is the announcement I made. Now, I'm not going to read all of it out, but I will just mention a couple of key phrases. So one of them is Zap is really intended for developers and functional testers who are new to pen testing. However, experienced pen testers may find it useful as well. And this was something, I didn't feel that I could really aim a tool at pen testers, because I didn't really, I was a developer. And actually, the initial tagline was the security tool for developers. And that stayed there until I had too many complaints from pen testers saying, hey, we use this tool as well. And also said that there'll be no pro version of Zap. So there'll be no incentive to restrict features. It'll always be free. And involvement in Zap is actively encouraged. So Zap was always there for people to contribute. And it's always strange when you make an announcement on a list, you never know what's going to happen. But I've since found out that lots of very important people spotted this and started following Zap. One of them was a guy called Ivan Boyle, who ended up offering me a job at Mozilla a couple of years later. So after that, promotion. And promoting, if you start an open source project, promoting is absolutely key. The BugTrack post was very much the starting point, and that did help. And I kind of, I saw the downloads started to take off, but they were still quite low. But I also offered Zap to OWASP as a project, and I was quite surprised when it was accepted, because I knew that OWASP had Web Scarab, which had been abandoned, but I wasn't sure whether it would be seen as too much competition. But it was accepted, and actually saw a massive jump in downloads. There were 400 downloads in one day, which was a huge jump at that time. We're now getting around 100,000 downloads a month, but nearly coming up to 1 million Docker pulls a month. But at the time, 400 downloads was very significant. And I started posting everywhere, particularly if you mentioned Paros Proxy or Web Scarab in this sort of after 2010, mid 2010, then I would inevitably reply saying, did you know that this tool's no longer available? Oh, no longer being maintained, but there's a new tool called Zap, which is, etc., etc. So I started posting everywhere and trying not to spam places, but I was very active online, trying to make sure that people actually were aware of it. And then at the end of 2011, we got a Toolsmith Tool of the Year, which was a really big boost. So Toolsmith is a newsletter or blog from a guy called Ross McCree. I think it was at Microsoft then, now at Google, but that was quite a big newsletter. And so to get Toolsmith Tool of the Year was very significant. But the next big thing was AppSec Dublin in 2012. So I got an email from someone at OWASP saying, "Would you like to talk here?" And that was quite scary for me. I'd never been to a developer conference, let alone security one. And they were asking me, a jumped up developer, to go and talk at a security conference. This seemed a bit crazy and was something that I was nervous about. But you have to try and go, you have to go for these things. Or that's what I think anyway. So I went along and it seemed to go down very well. And then immediately after the talk, an American guy came up to and asked me whether I wanted to present at AppSec USA. This was a big surprise, but I explained to him, look, my boss at work fly me from Manchester to Dublin, but I don't think he'll, to be honest, I don't think he'll cover flights to the States. I hadn't asked him, but I thought it was pushing it a bit. The guy said, don't worry, we'll cover it. We'll cover flights, hotel, and everything. At that point, I started thinking, okay, there's some potential here. This looks like fun. After that, I started going to a lot more security conferences, talking about Zap. And after a few years, I kind of worked out that I was talking to the same faces again and again. So I started going to a few more developer conferences. And that was very interesting and very useful because I started talking to people who hadn't heard of OWASP again, just like I hadn't in 2009, and explaining to them about what OWASP was and what Zap was and what Zap could do for them. And videos. Videos have been very useful for promoting Zap. Done over 100 to date, and we're carrying on doing lots of videos. These are good because people can watch them in their own time. You go to a conference and a few hundred people might watch you, and if you're lucky, the event will be recorded and they can watch afterwards. But videos have been particularly useful. We try and keep them to 10, 20, 30 minutes, so a bit shorter, focused on particular things. We found that's been very, very useful, and we're carrying on doing lots of those. So Zap Today, there's a core team, 4 of us. So myself, THC202, a guy called Ricardo, King Thorin Rick, and Ricecott, otherwise known as Akshat. And that's the core team. And Zap is very actively maintained, with both myself and Ricardo are currently full-time on Zap. We are trying to do average 2 releases a year, which we are actually succeeding on doing. But we do weekly releases, and we actually do daily or nightly releases as well. So we generate a Docker image every night. Now, there are 42 Zap repos in GitHub. So we've got a GitHub org, and so Zap is a big project now. 42 repos covering all sorts of things, including browser plugins. So it is a very big project and very active, even though there are not very many of us working on it full time. We do know that Zap is used by a large number of commercial tools. So there are companies making money out of it. And it'd be kind of good if they contributed back to Zap, but not many of them are doing that so far. A few are, but we haven't been particularly successful in encouraging companies to donate back, which is a shame. And as I said before, we believe that Zap is the world's most popular web app scanner. And actually, we're told we're a GitHub top 1,000 project as well. I'm not quite sure how they work that out, but it's based both on usage and downloads and a set of other features. So yeah, very proud to be one of those. So running a successful open source project, just a few things that kind of come to mind. One of them is whether you actually have a small focused team working on it and try and keep other people out and just do your own thing, or whether you want it to be a community tool. Now, I think it's actually probably easier to manage a small focused team. You can choose exactly what you want. You don't have to worry about other people's contributions. So that is probably a much easier option, but it's not the option that we have chosen to go for. Zap is all about community. I was looking for a welcoming, supportive project when I was, back in 2009. That didn't exist, and so I ended up creating it. So even though it would be easier for us to, just have the core team or extended team contributing, we are very focused on community and try and help community and people getting involved. And this means we spend quite a lot of time with new contributors, and it does take time. But if contributors stick around, then it's worth it. So if you want to get involved, then just get in touch. We have a contribution guide, very big one, which has a lot of work, tells you a lot of ways how you can get involved, all under zaproxy.org. But also just get in touch. You can email me, or you can chat to us on the Zap developer group. There's lots of ways to get in touch, all online again. If you have a community project, then you do need to accept it's no longer just your project. And I never talk about Zap as being my project. It belongs to everybody who contributes to Zap. That's a very important thing to me. And that's how I think about it, not just what I say. But one thing you do realize is you have to spin plates. You have to keep your eye on loads of things and keep on changing focus. At some point, one thing will be the most important thing you can look at, and then the next day it'll be something else. You have to keep a lot of things in the air, and sometimes you have to change your focus very quickly when events happen. And I'll give a couple of examples later on in this talk. But it's also, as well as changing focus frequently, you do need to try and make sure you do focus on things. Otherwise, you can be switching between things all day and not actually getting things done. So sometimes you have to go, okay, I do want to work on something. I'm going to focus on it. And you try and ignore all the distractions that come in, and just, focus on doing one thing and then getting back to what you're actually, you get focus on one thing and then get back to all of the other questions and queries that come in. Documentation is really important for an open source project. If it's not documented, then it doesn't exist. It seems to be. I'm quite surprised how few people actually seem to look at, go through a tool and play with all of the options. So documenting things is really important. And another thing is persistence. We get some negative feedback, and you've just got to ignore that. You've just got to accept that you cannot keep all of the people happy all of the time. You've got to do things, do what you believe in. Now, as an open source leader or someone contributing to open source, then you will find you have to wear many hats. Obviously, you're going to be implementing and testing and designing things. So these are the things as a developer you expect when you're working on open source, but it's far more than that. You do have to be a technical author. As I said, people don't seem to play around with options on their own, so it is not documented. It doesn't exist, and it's really useful being able to have links to features. And if you ask questions on the Zap user group or developer group, a lot of the time you'll find that we send you links. That's because we try and, if something isn't documented well enough, if we get lots of questions about something, we then try and improve the documentation so we can just share a link. That makes, that helps us speed things up and means we don't have to keep on repeating ourselves time after time. Now, I'm not a graphical artist, but you end up having to do some sort of graphics, whether it's something to do with the UI, whether it's graphics of blog post presentations like these. So I didn't do these Zapbot images, but I do mess around with them. I do cut them up and tweak them. So it helps to have some sort of understanding of a bit of graphics, so you can play around and add things. User support. This is really important, I think. Because particularly with a project as complex as Zap, and we have been told that in some cases, some users have said that our support is better than official support they've paid for in commercial projects. So this is something that we think is very important and something we do focus on. I'm not going to promise we answer everything or answer everything the way that people want, but it's something we spend a lot of time doing. And you have to be an evangelist. You have to get onto the boards or whatever chats where people are talking about tools like yours, and you got to explain how you have to go onto Stack Overflow. You have to go to conferences if you can, or talk online. You have to be the biggest evangelist for your project. You have to be a project manager. You have to kind of think, where is this project going? What do we focus on now? What can we put off till later? There's always way too many things that you want to do. And you have to be a team manager. So you have to talk to your team. You have to find out how people are getting on. You have to find out what people want to do, what they're happy doing, what they're unhappy doing, why they've suddenly stopped contributing. It might be something, they might be unhappy with how things are going, or it might be something completely outside work. We have to accept that everyone's got a lot going on. They can't focus on open source all the time. And you have to do marketing as well. You have to try and convince people that yours is a good tool to use, which kind of goes with all the evangelism as well. So if you decide to go down the route of trying to be a community-led project, how do you actually get contributors? So there's kind of 3 different types of contributors I thought we would get with Zap. I said Zap has always been a community project. This was our focus and still is. I was hoping we would get more security people involved. We've had some, but not as many as I'd like. We have found they tend to contribute to another commercial tool, which I'm sure you're aware of. Developers, I was again hoping a lot of developers would get involved, and they have done, but not as many as I'd have liked. And perhaps it's because they're nervous about contributing to security tools, or maybe they want to contribute to tools they use more directly, something much more developer focused. And they see security as still as someone else's problem, or something they don't really want to get involved in. But students has been I think the biggest number of contributors. We've had loads of students get involved, and they have made some really great contributions. So I've been very surprised about some of the biggest features in Zap have been initially developed by students. And we actually have a student hall of fame. So easy to find. It's on zaproxy.org. So this covers all of the students who have made significant contributions to Zap. And that has been through projects. So there's things like Google Summer of Code, which we always get involved in, and there's Mozilla Winter for Security, various other things. But students can actually get involved. If you're a student, you can get involved in Zap outside of these kind of projects. You don't have to just take part in Google Summer of Code. So if you want to get involved in Zap, please get in touch. As I said, we've got a contributing guide online, but we're always very keen to hear from students. So if you need to spend some time on an open source project as part of your university degree or something similar, or you want to spend time getting involved in a security project, please get in touch. And it is a great way to get into the security industry. I've seen, a lot of people say it's hard to get into the security industry, but when I first put together this Student Hall of Fame, I was so pleased to see, going through the LinkedIn links for the students, how many of them have been so successful in the industry. Basically, if you can get onto the Zap core team, and if you can continue contributing, then you will get job offers. Anyone who's got onto the Zap core team has had a job offer on that basis, and quite a few of us have actually accepted them as well. And many, the core team has had quite a few ex-Google Summer of Code students on there, and Akshat is actually one of those who was Google Summer of Code student. So one thing you do need to be aware of, particularly with a tool like Zap, is you never know what's coming next. Things can happen, and you've planned your week, and then something changes, and your focus has to change very quickly. So in 2016, I think it was on May the 15th, a hacker collective called Phineas Fisher, I don't think anyone officially knows who they are, breached the Catalonian Police Federation and published loads of sensitive information about the officers. And they released a video showing exactly how they did this, had an NWA soundtrack, a very anti-police song soundtrack, and the video starts with them booting up Kali, and then they fire up Zap. And the first 10 minutes was them hacking into the Catalonian Police Federation using Zap. Now, this was a little bit unexpected, and all hell broke loose in OWASP. There was the OWASP leaders list at the time, could be quite vociferous, and there were some calls from people on there that we should make Zap restricted to just to security researchers, or saying we should stop this somehow. It wasn't everyone there. A lot of people backed us, and we resisted this strongly. But there was a lot of heat and light, and this was something where, a lot of people got very upset with us and were saying, "How can you let this happen?" As if we could stop it. We had to explain this is an open source tool, and anyone can download it, and there's no way we can check who should be able to download and use these tools. So this was something that I had to focus on and make sure that put our point of view across and explain our position. But at the time, I was working at Mozilla, and pro tip here: if there are any problems, always be the first to break the bad news to your boss. Now, I'm based in the UK, and we were up before the States where my boss was. So as soon as he came online, got in touch with him, explained the situation, and he was like, "It's okay, it's fine. We're Mozilla. We understand these things happen. People use Firefox for bad things as well." So that was okay. But because he understood that rule as well about being the first person to break the bad news, he told his boss as well. His boss' reactions was, "Nice one." Of course, he knew the rule as well, so he told his boss, and she just said, "Oh, good publicity." So Mozilla were very cool about it and completely understood. But if you're in a similar situation, make sure you tell people, particularly those senior to you, and make sure you explain exactly what's going on so they're not surprised. Then next one, in 2021, on December the 10th, a vulnerability was made public in the Java Log4j package, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. And this actually allowed for remote code execution. So it was very quickly dubbed Log4Shell. Again, this was one which completely derailed my week, partly because in Zap we used Log4j. And so the first thing we had to do was work out whether we were vulnerable. And the bad news for us was, yes, we were vulnerable. Not out of the box. So you actually had to enable remote access to Zap, which we didn't do out of the box and we didn't recommend, but we still allowed it. And so that was something we had to make sure we told people immediately. And we actually got a Zap release out, new release out the same day. So we got a new release out. We hadn't long released. I think it was 2.11, and we got 2.11.1 out in one day, which for us was we don't normally do that, but sometimes you just got to jump. But the other thing is Log4j. Okay, so it had a CVE, and we don't usually check for CVEs, but this is one where it's not one particular like a WordPress plugin or something. This was a library that so many projects use. We thought, well, let's see if we can actually create a rule for detecting it, and we did. And 2 days later, we released the Log4Shell Zap Active Scan rule, and I think we were one of the first projects to actually security tools to actually come out with a rule like this. So we were one of the first ones out there. Which again is a lot of work, but it was worth it. So that's the kind of things that happen. One thing that we've also found is that there are a lot of open source security tools out there, and a lot of them come and go. So what I now have is I have a repo where I track open source web scanners, and you'll see there are, here's a quick summary, but there are, for many years, Arachne and W3F were big competitors for us in the open source world. They've now been abandoned. Skipfish was very big in 2012, but that's been long abandoned now. So we see a lot of open source tools coming on, appearing, and everyone says, "Oh, this is amazing, this is wonderful," but tools like Zap take a lot of maintenance, and it takes a lot of determination and commitment to keep on maintaining these tools and making them better year after year, and not many people do it. So we do find that they come and go, and it's something that you will have competitors. It's worth keeping an eye on them, but don't get too upset about it and don't focus on them too much. Make sure you know what you're doing and keep on doing it well. We do have a lot of ongoing challenges, of course. Getting more long-term contributors, that has been hard for us. We want more long-term contributors. I said, if you want to get involved with Zap, please get in touch. Getting actionable feedback is something which has also been hard for us, and I think it's hard for open source tools in general. So we sometimes, sometimes see something on an online forum with people complaining, but actually finding out exactly what's wrong and getting people to share enough information, particularly when it's Zap doesn't find a particular vulnerability, or it does find one which is a false positive. People typically unwilling to share details of commercial websites and web applications with a tool if they're not giving them money. So getting the details is hard. And there are so many ways people can get in touch with us. We've got emails, we've got GitHub issues, got Slack, the old Slack, we've got Google Groups, there's Twitter, there's Mastodon, there's Stack Overflow. There's so many ways that people can talk about tools like Zap, and keeping on top of them is hard. And working out what to do, the right thing to do at the right time, is really tricky. And you can never be sure that you're doing that. So just got to believe in what you're doing and make sure that you're prepared to change as and when required. And funding has been an ongoing problem for us, and something I'll talk a bit more about. So really, for the first 2 years, I was doing this in my own time, and Ricardo joined THC202 and joined in 2011. He was working on Zap in his own time as well. From 2012, I was employed by Mozilla, and I was able to work on Zap between 40 and 80% of my time, and that was really brilliant. But then we found I knew I was not going to be able to spend as much time as I needed to at Mozilla, so I joined a couple of startups. So I was there for 2 years and then 1 year, and I was able to focus on Zap, but those relationships didn't work very well, and I wasn't able to stay there. Now, in this year, in August, I joined the software security project, and Ricardo has as well. So two of us are now working full-time on Zap, but we still need to make sure that we actually get more funding. I said we've actually had 21 students contribute to Zap as part of Google Summer of Code, which is amazing. They're all on the Student Hall of Fame. Mozilla Winter of Security, we had 3 students in one team, and 1 student from Google Season of Docs who did some great work as well. We've had various competitions as well, where we've actually had paid for prizes covering scripts, unit tests, and report templates. So we'll try those again, but we haven't really succeeded in getting lots of funding or enough funding for Zap. Really, the way we've thought about Zap is, build Zap and they will build something good and people will come, and that is very much true. If you build something that is good and people find it useful, people will find out about it and will use it. Build it and they will fund. That's not been the case. We do get some companies contributing money, but not very many. And unfortunately, there's a lot of companies out there who are relying on us and other open source projects and do not support them. And that's something we need to change, not just for Zap, but for the industry. And I've found out to my cost that startups can't be relied on to fund open source projects as well. They seem very keen, but they have very tight focuses on making money, and publicizing themselves. And so they're not good for reliable long-term funding of a developer or more. And so building an open source software security stream is very hard, and that's not something that we've cracked yet. So conclusions. I do think that luck plays a big part in this. It helps being the right place at the right time. I think if I'd started Zap earlier, then might have clashed with something like Web Scarab. As it was, there was a need for an open source security project like Zap, and it took off for that reason. So it's right place, right time, and starting something similar now would be much harder. An open source project is for life. I mean, a lot of people don't, if you want to be successful, you've got to keep on contributing it. You've got to keep pushing it forward. So it takes a lot of effort, and you just got to keep on doing it. But an successful open source project opens many doors. I was offered jobs at some of the biggest companies in the world just on the basis of my contribution to Zap. I chose to go to Mozilla because I thought that would be the best way I could keep Zap going, and that proved very true. And as I said, everybody who's worked on Zap and has got into the core team has had job offers as a result of it. So get involved in open source projects. It really pays dividends, particularly if you're starting out. If you're new to the security industry and you want to get involved and become part of the industry, get involved in an open source security tool like Zap. Don't be afraid to start a new open source project. I certainly was, and it was something that you have to think very carefully about. It's going to be a long-term commitment if you want to get anywhere. It is easier to get involved in existing open source project, but if you find one that isn't really what you want, then start a new one. There's no, you can do it. But funding is really important and really hard. And as I said, to date, that is something we have not been particularly successful about. So that's something we're going to have to work at. And we need to solve that in order to keep Zap going, because Zap has now got to the stage where we need people working on it full time. There's 2 of us, but we need to make sure that can carry on and we get more people working on it. So that's everything I wanted to cover. Apart from keep plugging away, don't get discouraged. If you're working in open source, to carry on working on it, keep plugging away, and you should get there. So if you want to learn more about Zap, then www.zaproxy.org. And that's everything I want to talk about. So I don't know, do we have any questions?
Hi, Simon.
Oh, yeah.
That's a wonderful talk. I got to know a lot about the history of ZAP and the kind of phases the project has gone through. We have, yeah, some questions. I mean, before that, I have a couple of questions myself.
Sure.
First one is any other, successful open source security project that that has made money? Like, I mean, like they're well off, like they have solved the funding problem. Anybody Mm.
I think it's something. The only ones I know, well, whether they've made money or not, but I think there's certain projects where they have an online component, and it's something where if you go for the VC funding, it's possible you can get VC funding, and we could do that with Zap, but then you have to be aware that you have to start making significant amounts of money, and you've got to keep on making money. So you either go down the open core idea where you have an open source project, but then you have a very definite plan forward of how you make money, and online service software as a service is clearly a way of doing that.
Mm.
So something like Nmap, I think, has been quite successful. I mean, they're not specifically, they're kind of they're networking as well as security. So they seem to have done quite well. But the other ones I know about who have money, I think, are really VC funding. I don't know whether they've got the money back yet. But yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I think Project Discovery and TruffleSec are like two that come on top of my head. Both
Yeah,
of them has raised uh, money from VCs.
yeah.
And also open source. Also, because this is such a successful project, right? And I'm pretty sure there's some guy sitting in some company who is thinking that, okay, if only we can just buy the Zap proxy and close source it and license it, we'll make a ton of money. So did people offer you money to buy Zap?
Well, I mean, Zap is licensed, so it's Apache v2, so anyone can take it. They don't have to give us any money. Maybe we should have, or I should have chosen to use a different license. But I wanted Zap to be available to everyone,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of companies out there who are bundle it high using Zap on their online services and presumably making money out of it, but they are very few of them in contributing back. I think GitLab is one of the probably worst offenders. That they're so their pro version I think makes quite a big use of Zap. They've never contributed at all. Stackhawk used to support me, but they don't anymore, and their whole business was based around Zap. So yeah, there's companies out there who should be contributing back to Zap and aren't.
And recently, I have seen like a crack map exact there are like a couple of projects who changed their licensing model recently. Like if they were like Apache 2 or something, and then they changed it recently. Interesting. Yeah, we have some questions. I'm putting them on stage. Um any tips on team building? How do you find people who are passionate as you about the project? As passionate as you about the project?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that. So one thing is making sure that people really understand that it's a community project and that anyone can get involved. You
Hmm.
never know what's going to happen. I mean, I was going back and looking through some of the history, and just remember, I got an email on the developer group from someone who's handled THC 202,
Hmm.
helped them out. They got them involved, and I didn't realize at the time, but a guy called Ricardo, and he's been working on Zap with me ever since. He's now one of the project leaders. So you never know who gets in touch, who might just suddenly be one of the most important people to get involved. So you have to kind of treat anyone who gets involved or wants to get involved as a potential long-term contributor and help them and trust them, and make sure that one thing we always say when people start getting involved is, what can I do? And our question to them is, what would you like to do? We want people to focus on things that they enjoy, that they find interesting. Because if someone finds something interesting and challenging, then they're more likely to stick to it. So there's loads of things you can do on Zap. And, our job as Zap project leaders is to help people get involved. That's how we see it. Um, but we haven't been successful in getting loads of people on board, long-term contributors. So that's what we try and do.
Also, what differentiates Zap from other projects that has kind of died off? Like why is Zap persistent? Like how did it make it compared to others? What were
Uh,
they lacking?
well, I think probably sheer bloody mindedness. Um,
Hmm.
so I think it's the fact that we've kept working at it,
Hmm.
and it's something that we think is important. We think that the world, the online world, needs a tool like Zap, an open source tool that
Hmm.
you know that so many individuals and companies use. And we could have gone down the commercial route, but there's a lot of commercial web security tools out there. There are very few um, open source ones, and we believe it's important. So yeah, sheer bloody mindedness, I think, is the answer there.
Also, with the advances of AI, that at the rate that it's going on and stuff, maybe some year down the line, do you see any integrations with Zap? Do you have anything in mind?
So this is something, obviously I've been keeping an eye on AI as I think we all have, and it's very interesting and fascinating and lots of interest. But you have to be aware that at the moment with the large language models, they're trying to, at the moment, they generate what looks correct. So they are, you know, working in terms of tokens and what's the most likely thing. And that means they don't have any real understanding. and it means they get details wrong. So, I've played around with AI and I've asked questions. And the first thing I did was ask ChatGPT to generate a Zap script. And I was amazed it actually knew what Zap was and how to generate a Zap script. Brilliant. The
Mm.
script was wrong. It didn't compile. And that's the problem. So I think large language models at the moment are really great for summarizing things. And there's some times when I've been playing around with stuff, particularly when I get involved in JavaScript, I'm doing some fairly horrible things. So I'll ask questions, and sometimes it's really helped me.
Mm.
But I'm aware that it often gets things wrong, and particularly with detail. So you have to be very careful about that. And ChatGPT and other AI tools seem to be good if you know what you're doing, but want to learn about something that's new to you. But if you're a complete novice and you don't know what's right, then it's really hard because it sounds authoritative and it's often wrong in the details. So, they're great tools, but be careful how you use them and don't believe anything they say.
There's another question. What was your motivation in the first few months or years when you didn't see much traction, or you didn't have like many users? How did you keep yourself from giving up?
Well, to start with, it was just fun, and to be honest, it's still fun. I really, I really enjoy the security industry, and you get to do weird things. And initially, it was all about I was trying to learn about security. I had no training, but I was an experienced developer, and then I'd learnt about all these weird security attacks and vulnerabilities. So I was just trying to get my head around them and understand them. And I could read about them, but I don't learn best by reading. I learn best by hacking on stuff, by playing around with things, by trying things out in the browser or in Zap or something like that. So I wanted to actually understand how the vulnerabilities came about and how to find them and exploit them, and then try to work out how could I detect them. So I was just having a lot of fun with Zap, and initially a few people were using it, people getting in touch, and this was new to me. I've only worked in closed source before, so it was fun, and it's still fun. That's how I think of it.
Also, what is the next big milestone for Zap? Like, where are you headed? And what is
Oh,
the next big thing? Like some feature or something like what is it?
well, so we've had a a survey out asking people what they'd like us to focus on, and quite a few things came up. None of them were great surprises. One of those was handling modern web apps better. This was
Mm.
not a surprise. So that's something we have been focusing on, and we've got a couple of browser extensions. So there is a Zap browser extension in both the Firefox and the Chrome stores. We
Mm.
don't expect you to install it from there because we include it within Zap, and then we inject it into the browsers when we launch them. But
Mm.
that means we have a real presence in the browser, and that allows us to see what's going on. And initially, we're streaming select information back from the browser to Zap, which is really great. We've got
Mm.
some big plans, so there's a lot more things we can do. And I don't think any security tool is really handling modern web apps well. None of them.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of potential, and we're all learning. We're all learning as we go along. And okay, some of the commercial tools have hundreds of people working on them, but that means there's just so much to play around with. So there's always stuff to do, and there's always new things to learn. I like learning. It's fun.
Got it. I think this is more like feedback. Can we see an inbuilt feature for report generation in Zap instead of a plugin from third party?
I
Any-
so the report add-on is actually created by the core team.
Ah.
So the it's not a third part. A lot of the marketplace apps add-ons are from the core team. What we've done is we're trying to move as much functionality out of the Zap core into the marketplace, into add-ons. So if you download Zap now, you will get the report add-on as standard. But the reason we do this is if something's in an add-on and on marketplace, we can then update it at any point. We're
More.
doing kind of
Hmm.
we can do 2 releases a year. So if
Hmm.
it's in the core and we make a change, it could be 6 months before we can get out there. Whereas something like the new client add-on, which injects the extensions, the browsers, we could just release that whenever we wanted. So just because it's on the marketplace doesn't mean that it's not a core feature, if you like. It's an essential feature to Zap. So that is the report generation add-on. That's the official one for Zap, and it's maintained by the core team. So yeah, it's not going back in the core. We're trying to move stuff out of the core rather than into it.
Awesome. And also for corporates that who want to contribute to Zap, who are using Zap, what is the best way to do that?
So get in touch. We're now part of the software security project, and that has been for the last few months has been getting set up. But we will be able to accept donations, and we're looking at a whole range of things, from things like support agreements and consultancy. We're going to have to focus a bit more. I'm going to have to focus a bit more on working at how we can carry on funding Zap, because we need funding in order to develop Zap in the way it needs to be developed.
Understood. I think that's all the questions we have. Um,